You're listening to Bigfoot Society podcast hosted by our captain, Jeremiah Byron, where it's all Bigfoot all the time. Have you ever had the urge to do more, to be more? Now you can by joining Bigfoot Society on the Patreon. Get ad-free episodes and even member-only episodes. Take part in movie night and even live video chats. Interact behind the scenes with Jeremiah and other Patreon members like me, Leia. The powerful podcast goes on, and you may contribute a verse in our Patreon community. Carpe diem. Seize the day, Bigfooters, and make your lives extraordinary.
Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we've got the privilege of talking to Yahola Tiger. He's the host of the War Cry podcast, and he's a member of the Cherokee Nation and also of Muskogee Creek descent. How's it going tonight, Yehola?
I'm pretty good, man. I'm just hanging out, doing stuff, spooky stuff. I love talking about spooky stuff. That's why we're here, but I appreciate you having me.
Oh, absolutely. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while, so I'm glad that this finally worked out. You're also from the great state of Oklahoma, correct?
Beautiful, yes. Beautiful state of Oklahoma. Born and raised Cherokee Res. Lived a lot of my life on the Cherokee Res, and then moved my way over to my other side, to my Muskogee Creek side. And yeah, Oklahoma, man. All different types of things going on, but yeah, man, it's a beautiful place.
Fantastic. And a lot of my listeners will know that about Oklahoma because they know more of probably the southeast section. There's some wild Bigfoot stuff that goes on over there. But if you could let us know context-wise, what part of Oklahoma on a map are we talking? More western side, eastern, whereabouts?
I'm from northeast Oklahoma. So Tahlequah is the capital of the Cherokee Nation, and it's located, I'd say, probably about 30 minutes from the Arkansas border up in the northeast Oklahoma. And it's people. That's one thing too that I guess people don't really don't. I don't want to say give the Northeast credit, but there's a lot of woods, a lot of hills up in the Northeast, and so there's all types of stuff going on in Northeast Oklahoma.
Absolutely. How far away from the Ouachitas are you?
Man, that's a great question. I'm gonna have to pull out my ninth grade geography book. I would say so. That's what I'm thinking. Probably maybe an hour and a half, maybe.
All right. No sweat.
Maybe more, man. Like I said, my geography is not what it used to be.
It's cool. The Northeast. I've talked to a lot of people from Southeast, of course. I've talked to a gentleman from the West. The Western Oklahoma has some crazy stuff too. But now it sounds like we may have some action going on in the Northeast as well. But we were talking earlier, and we were talking about that you've heard of some Bigfoot related things over the years. And we've mentioned already that you're a member of the Cherokee Nation. Have you grown up then hearing about Bigfoot over the years, or when did that start to come into your life that you remember?
Man, it's been my entire life. My first thought and my first really core memory of Bigfoot was I might have been 6 or 7 years old. My dad, if people are listening, when you're driving into Tahlequah, on the right-hand side, there's a big old casino now. Back 20, 25 years ago, it used to just be a pasture. And there used to be a golf course on the other side of that pasture. And I remember one of my first stories I ever heard as a young buck was my dad's best friend was driving home one night. And he saw something up on the right-hand side of the road. And he looked, he said, "What is that?" He just kept driving. He said, "Oh, that's probably a deer. I'll slow down." And so he kept coasting, and he eventually passed this, what he could see. It was just so dark. There's no lights out there. And when he hit his brakes, when he was passing this thing, All he saw was a hairy arm and basically a hairy, I'd say maybe a quad. And he hit his brakes and that light hit it. And that thing scurried off into that pasture. And he didn't see anything, but he took off. One thing about that story that has come full circle now, 2023, I talked to my dad's best friend. I said, hey, you remember telling me that story when I was a little guy? And he goes, no, I don't really remember that. He's like, when did I tell you that? I said, well, you told me one time when we were all hanging out and you were playing guitar with my dad. And he goes, I don't remember that. And about a week later, he goes, yeah, man, I sat and thought about it. I said, I do remember that because now that road is a heavily traveled road and it's not really secluded like it used to be. In Cherokee Nation, and I don't want to speak for all Cherokees, I don't want to speak for all Creeks either, all really tribes in general. There's different types of these things. And there's some that make you forget. And I'm not going to say the name because if you say the name, you're going to call it. But they make you forget. And sometimes almost like Men in Black where they hit you with that thing and you're like, your mind's erased and then you don't remember. And he goes, I think that's what happened to me because I was so scared. I just don't remember. And then I guess he traveled down that road or I don't know how he remembered, but then he was like, man, I remember that. He said that thing had to be like 9 foot tall because he was sitting in this car and all he saw was basically a thigh. If you see a thigh in the in the back glass, that has to be pretty tall. But there's all types of those stories that come around in that area. And to be long-winded, that's how we are. Indians would be like that. I've been hearing stories and I've experienced things in my life where it's been my entire life.
Yehola, I want to go back to something you said really quick, and I don't want to go too deep into it because it's obvious that we don't want to, but I do want to address it. It says, you said something to the effect of, we don't want to call it. And can you explain what that means without, we don't want to do what it is that you would refer to, but what that would mean where we don't want to call it?
So what I mean by is, there's multiple things that Sasquatch and Bigfoot can do that we as human beings sometimes don't understand. I'm trying to put this in a context that makes this digestible, I guess you could say. But essentially what they can do is there's always been this Native American medicine or magic or shamanism is what some people out west call it. They do those things too. And it's a superstitious thing, but when you talk about these things, there's a certain energy that comes with that. It's like an intention thing. But when you talk about, and that's why when we talk about a lot of things in Native culture, we use, and I'll say the names because I'll smoke off after this. Smoke, and by the way, smoke off means with cedar and things like that for people that don't know those things. Dr. Cedar. But
is this going to affect the listeners though? Okay.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't. Now, I'd always, anytime that someone's talking about different things, especially when it comes to Bigfoot, even talking about Bigfoot, that you're still talking about him. You can still do what you got to do. I do my certain things. People do their own things. You could pray, but that's what I mean by that is when you use their name, there's a certain old way name that you use. I know the Creek name and they can come into your dreams. They can come in physical. There's just different ways that these things can come to you. And that, like I said, it could be anything too. It could just be energy. You could just have bad luck. And I'm really talking generally. I know there's probably some people out there, oh, he's talking crazy right now. But yeah, that's what I mean by we don't want to call it by its name.
I absolutely understand. Yeah. We definitely want to respect that. In your area of Oklahoma in the Northeast, have you found that most Sasquatch sightings will occur around the reservation, or is it's all over the place? It doesn't have to be specifically just in the actual reservation area? All the reservations, so there's, like I said, there's the 5 civilized that take up the eastern part of the state. I don't want to get political or anything, but that's just how that's divided up. And now with
kind of federal type things going on, but it happens all over the place. I have heard stories from different people up in northern, I'd say probably north central, I'd say probably north of Oklahoma City. There's been stories up there of them hanging out around at a powwow. They'll be at the tree line or at the stomp grounds. They'll be out there because a lot of those grounds, so especially stomp grounds, are near water. You got to make sure you have water around when you're doing those things. And a lot of people say that they travel by water, and there's different various opinions on that. But like I said, they're all over the place in Oklahoma. I think I tried to ask somebody elder. I said, "How many do you think there is?" And they gave me a number like 1,000 or something like that. And I was just like, man, that's a lot. That's a lot. I have people that reach out to me about every week telling me, hey, I saw something over here in Concho, Oklahoma, or I saw something over here in Anadarko, or I saw something over here in Hugo. It's all over the place here in Oklahoma.
Oklahoma has incredible Bigfoot stories. And I'm not going to mention the name of the group, but man, there's this one Facebook group about Oklahoma Bigfoot stories. Oh my goodness. It's a smaller one. And if you're in it, you know what I'm referring to. It's a Fight Club type thing if you're in it. But oh man, you guys have some wild stuff down there. Do you think there's a reason Oklahoma it feels like there's so much, I don't know how to say, I would say like maybe aggressive Sasquatch stories or sightings. Do you think there's a reason why there's so many in that state, or is that something you've ever thought about?
I've heard some pretty aggressive encounters just here in the last, I'd say probably month. I was told a story about out in Anadarko, Oklahoma. And a guy he had his animals out there and he had shot at it. And this thing had killed after it shot it, the next morning he went out there and every single one of his animals was gone, perished. And I also wonder if it correlates with how Oklahoma is, and just in general, how we are. We're aggressive people a little bit. If you treat people with respect, you're going to be all right. But once it comes to disrespecting people, it can get physical, or it can. And I'm wondering if those things mimic that energy with people coming like all the time. This land that hasn't been touched in a lot of years or ever maybe is being habitated by people with a lot of money. I mean, they're moving up to these hills and these mountains and some of these valleys. And just speaking from experience, there was a guy out in Yehola who bought some land at the bottom of this infamous place that is known for Bigfoot. Like, it's known. It's not catacombs, but it's more like caves. But there's caves out there in this little cliff. I don't want to say the name, but it's out in Yehola area.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
But he bought land out there, and I'm always wondering if he's all right. Because, man, you bought land. You inhabited a place that no one has ever inhabited. And I often wonder if that's the case, too.
So that's very intriguing to me. That's an area that I don't think has come up yet. And I'm looking it up on a map, and it's so interesting because if you look up Eufaula, Oklahoma, it's almost like on this peninsula in the middle of this huge lake. It's really interesting area. I need to look more into that.
Eufaula Lake is man-made. And one thing that I know, like I said, I know this is a Bigfoot show. There's been talks of an octopus in there, a red octopus in that lake. I know I have plenty of stories of people talking about giant snakes in that lake. Mythical, I guess you'd say mythical, but in our native culture, there's big snakes in there. A lot of it too, I think, was when they made that lake, there was a lot of stomp grounds down there. And there was a lot of habitat that these beings, these creatures inhabited. And when you take over, nature's going to do something. At my uncle's property out in Eufaula, there was one time we were talking about these things out there. We were telling stories because that's how we talk. That's how we kind of communicate lessons and different stories, and is by talking about some these things sometimes and trying to tell people to act right. And we were all out there and we were talking and people telling stories, and something big ran through, mowing down all this brush and these trees, and it's thick out there. And it came right up to the tree line, and it was dead quiet. There was not a single sound in that whole clearing. It was like no birds, nothing, no crickets. It was like the alpha predator came and heard its name being called, and it had to see what was going on. That's one thing that's, I think, when it comes to that area and it comes to like Northeast Oklahoma, like I mentioned, it's very intriguing to me. That's why I continue to gather stories and information, and I'm so intrigued by Bigfoot.
Oh, absolutely. And this is something you've mentioned a few times, and I'd like you to take a few minutes to define what it means, because I'm just not familiar with the term, and there might be some listeners as well. Can you define what the term stomp grounds means?
So it's ceremonial grounds. Stomp grounds kind of slang, but it's ceremonial grounds. And so ceremonial grounds are in specific areas. And an origin story, especially for the creeks, back in the old days when we were being removed, we had fire, and the fire guided us to our home here in Oklahoma. And there were certain selected people in the tribe that would basically follow that fire and catch that fire, so we didn't lose who we are. And that goes into a whole different other thing. But wherever that fire landed, you had to harness it, and you had to make sure it was taken care of. And wherever it landed is where your grounds were, where your ceremonial grounds were, which is for your praising the Creator and thanking the Creator for what you've done, and or asking for healing or whatever needs to be done in those times.
That's so interesting. It has parallels to the Old Testament almost.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's the one thing that's just so intriguing about history, man. It's almost like it repeats itself almost a little bit.
Yeah. Or it almost has a similar story, but in different fonts. It's so weird the more you look into things and more that you look into different cultures. And yeah, that could be a whole other discussion. So talking about the stomp ground, so you're saying that when they created that lake, they took over some stomp ground. So I could definitely understand how that could be. That is a terrible thing to do. But you mentioned the giant snakes. So how large were these snakes that were being seen in this lake?
Anywhere from the size of a worm to the size of maybe 50 feet. I'll tell you a very interesting story. So I have a cousin who he's funny, but he's real big into. He probably listens to your show. Hey, cousin, what's going on? No, I was playing.
Hey, cousin.
But he was on Google Maps, and you know how sometimes you can get real close and see things, and you can see outlines. The drone or whoever takes those pictures of that Google Maps caught one of those snakes going into the lake. And he was trying to do the pencil markers, and it was just the back end of the snake was like 22 feet as he was trying to figure it out. But these snakes have power. They have, how I say, and this is one of my favorite, I ain't gonna lie, my favorite being, my native being that I love to talk about is these snakes. Born and raised in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, we have the Illinois River. And these things are known to cause floods. And the Illinois is flooded multiple times because of people not taking care of that water. The same thing with Eufaula. That lake is flooded multiple times over the years because people just aren't taking care of it. But what these snakes are is they are the king of the water. They take care of the water. They make sure people take care of it. And when it's not being taken care of, they take matters into their own hands. One thing about Oklahoma, I'm sorry, we're deviating off, man.
No, let's go for it. We're good, man. Let's go.
And one thing that is very well known here in Oklahoma is there's a lot of drownings. And that's one thing that I see the newspapers all the time. How does people keep drowning? Oh, they must be just drinking too much. But it's strange that it's a lot of kids, younger people. You hardly ever see anybody old drowning. Maybe someone in their 30s. Maybe that's not really that old. That's one thing that people credit these snakes, and I do personally, to taking these people because maybe, not saying it's sacrifice, but that's the game you play when you disrespect nature in the water.
Absolutely. It's not a thing that you get multiple chances with. You've got to respect it for sure. Speaking of the water, you also mentioned the octopus. Is that, you hear people talk about the Oklahoma octopus. Is that the same thing, or is this a different thing?
Same thing. And crazy story that I heard from somebody out of Eufaula. And I've also heard kind of murmurs about, I think it's Thunderbird Lake, I think is the other one that I've heard things from. But I had somebody tell me that basically they saw one run across the road, this major highway, broad daylight. And it was a small one, which I was like, that's crazy. Do you believe it? Sometimes people will just maybe just try to tell you a story to get on the podcast. I don't know, but I thought it was pretty interesting. But the Oklahoma octopus has been around for quite a long time. There was a guy, and I cannot remember his name at the top of my head, but he had been investigating this, and they've also attributed a lot of these drownings in all these lakes to being that creature, that being. And when I say being, it's more than just a creature is what I'm getting to. It's more of, people talk about these mythical beings or these mythical entities, and that's what I'm referring to. If you ever hear me when I say being, these things they're not of this world, or they're not of the normal world that we know.
Totally understand. When you refer to Sasquatch, and the thing about this show is that there's many different viewpoints about what the creature is, and I'd like to think that I talk to many different viewpoints through people. When you're referring to Bigfoot yourself, what is in your mind, or what's your definition of the creature when you're referring to Bigfoot?
Man, that's a great question. I've asked people that same question, and I always find it very intriguing. My opinion of it, though, is a weird one. So I think that they are and I don't want to say a set of people, and not human is not what I'm trying to say. A lot of Cherokees believe that they're a secret tribe, and that they exist when they want to be seen, and they want to be known that they're there. A story that I had come across as a young guy so I used to go to a cultural camp during the summer times at Sequoia High School in Tahlequah. And I heard a story from an elder that he said that they look like humans, but they are just hairy, and they got beards, but they're like super tall. He described this Sasquatch or this Bigfoot to being about 9 foot tall with a beard. It looked like a human face, but it had a beard. And he called it a person. And growing up in my mind, I envision that. I think of if they are people, or if they're I know there's a theory out there that they're interdimensional beings. I know that people think that they're possibly a shapeshifter, or I've heard different things. And in my opinion, I think that they're another set of, like, a tribe. And it's not a people, it's a tribe of beings. They have ways and methods to remain undetected. And I go back to talking about like native medicine or native magic or shamanism. Native American, but I don't practice that stuff. I don't practice those things. Much like, and I have that same thought when it comes to Sasquatch, is not all of them practice the ability to disappear. Not all of them practice the ability to look like a stump. Like some stories you hear, I heard a story one time, somebody basically sat on it and didn't even thought it was a stump. They were just hiking, and next thing the stump was moving. I believe that if they want to be seen, they will be seen. And they use these different methods and these different old ways is what I call it. But it's these herbs and use different methods to be seen or not to be seen. So I think that they are of this world, but it's hard to describe what's of this world.
Absolutely. The stories that you've heard from your area, and you've talked to many different people over the years, are orbs ever parts of those stories? Is that a thing that ever comes up down in Oklahoma?
Yes, I've heard a lot of stories A lot of stories about orbs. The famous one here in Oklahoma is out in Miami. It's called the spook light, but it looks like a light kind of that travels around. In northeast Oklahoma, my dad has actually seen, it looks like a fireball, but it dances. It looks like a person walking, or if someone was running, and makes that movement. And old Cherokees believe that it's the souls of people that are watching over things. And they left their soul there to maybe guard something. Who really knows what it's really for?
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
But I've also heard that those things. This is gonna. I don't think I've shared this, but I'm going to share it to you. I have heard stories that these orbs dance around maybe buried treasure or some type of fortune. And I have heard stories of Bigfoot or Dogman protecting this treasure. I have heard those stories. Maybe it's treasure or something from like 1600. Who knows? Who knows what it is? I've also heard Bigfoot being associated with these orbs as well. So, but at the end of the day, people see the orbs and they're like, okay, I see an orb in the middle of this pasture. What's going on or what's happening? There's no explanation, but the old elders believe that it's possibly the soul of people past gone that's protecting their wealth, or it could be that they're just trying to find another way maybe to go to the other side. It's very interesting though.
Can you tell me anything more about Bigfoot guarding a buried treasure? That's an extremely new one for me. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to describe that, because when I was told that story, basically somebody was digging up. Basically, they had figured out that there was some type of. Basically, they followed the orb. Essentially, is what the story was told, and they dug it up. And when they looked over, there was a Sasquatch there, growling at them. Now, he said it was maybe been protecting. I don't really. I just use protecting as hey, like when you hear that, hey, it's probably time to get out of here. I probably shouldn't be trying to collect this treasure or whatever this fortune is, or whatever he was trying to look for. That's just very interesting. That's why I haven't heard a lot of those stories, but if anyone out there, hey, if you got one of those, let me know.
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to clarify that because I was like, man, I don't want it to start like hey, I saw an orb. There's going to be, it's like the new Leprechaun and the rainbow.
Yeah,
like,
no.
Who knows? But
no, I just had that story I heard that story years ago, but they basically followed it, that flame. And it brought them to basically, it did a circle or whatever, like it was in a pattern essentially. And they noticed that it stopped at a certain location and it moved to the next. And so they really, like I said, it's an older story. It could have just been coincidence. I know a lot of people see aliens with Bigfoot. It's another thing I've heard, but I haven't heard much on the alien part, but I have heard a few times of people seeing that flame and then they hear footsteps behind them or something running through the woods. I have heard that too as well. And my dad actually was out I'm name dropping some of these towns, but my dad, I think he was out at Holbert and heard something like that. We saw an orb and then heard something, thought was weird, but nothing ever approached him. He heard something out with that orb. So, and it also could be too that maybe Bigfoot's trying to find that treasure too, or whatever that is out there.
Dude, it's such an awesome start to a story. It is so cool, like the buried treasure of Bigfoot in Oklahoma, and like dude, I'm loving it. So let's pretend, let's say we're in your area of Oklahoma in the Northeast. We're at a campfire and there's maybe some people are there. They're starting to get older. They're older than kids now. They're getting into junior high, maybe high school. And so the older individuals are like, okay, it's time to tell them the story about Bigfoot that is, we all knew about it. And now these kids are old enough to know. Are there any stories like that are passed around the campfires up in your area?
Yes. Yeah. Yes and no. A story, I remember being, like you mentioned, we experienced that the one that was running through this brush coming towards us while we were sitting around telling stories. Another story that spooks me out to this day, it's out in Park Hill, Oklahoma. It's a little bit outside of Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And my dad at the time was a young guy. He was living with my grandpa at the time, and he lived next to this park. It's called Merle Home Park. It was about, I'd say, probably a mile and a half from his house. And it was a hot night, and with old Indian houses, especially old Indian heads, they don't like, no, we ain't not turning that AC on. We're going to keep it steaming in this house. So he had to open the window. And my dad is laying there, and being mine, I've never told this story publicly, but this is a good time to tell it. And he's laying there in bed, and he hears something jump over the fence, and it makes this sound, like the creaking sound. And he hears these large footsteps coming up to the window. And he's laying there, and what is that? And it lets out this, like a horse. Like a horse would make this kind of huffing sound. It was real deep. And my dad sat there, and he was sitting there, and he's getting real, what is this? What is going on? And it made that huffing noise again, and he heard the creaking of the fence. So either it opened the fence or it opened the gate, because it was one of those little latch gates that you can just flip up and open, or it jumped the fence and it took back off where he was going. The area is a very spooky area, and it's got a lot of things going on. And in that area, when I was a young guy, I'll tell you I think my encounter with, I believe it was one of these creatures, one of these beings. I used to take my friends out to this park and spook them out, because I know how to get the spookies going. And in this park, there's these trails that go up into this kind of hill area, and it's pitch black. You can't see anything. Tree cover, you can't see any of the stars. And I'm messing with them. You're never supposed to hoot. I was always told never to hoot, but I'd mess with them. They're white folks. Messing with, like to show them that I know a few things. I'm Indian. I can summon these things and just have a little ego about it. And I made that mistake. So we come back off the bridge, and I go, hey, let's stop real quick. I'm going to hoot 3 times and watch, see what happens. I hoot the first time. Everybody goes, hey, all right, man. Hey, okay, hey. We get the point. You're trying to scare us. We get it. I hoot a second time. And they're like, no. Hey, okay. Hey, Yehola, okay, chill out. It's cool. When I hoot that third time, when you go over that bridge, there's a little underpass that you can walk down to underneath that bridge. And there was a roar came from under that bridge. And I always equate it to King Kong's roar, but it hit you. It hit me. And when it roared, I blacked out. Be in mind, I'm going to describe the people that I'm with. I'm with 2 6'6", 350-pound guys. I'm the last person in the back, closest to the car. After that third hoop, and we hear that roar, and I black out. Those big boys were in the car in 2 seconds. Took off, and I come back into my mind all the way, and we're halfway. We're already almost home. And my mind comes back. And I think what we ran into that night was one of those ones that make you forget. Because I don't remember from the time that I hooted that third time to hearing that roar to when we were almost halfway home. And to this day, I still have those people that say, man, I don't know why. That was the craziest thing I've ever heard. I have never heard anything that made me feel that way. It's almost like if you were face to face with a lion and it roared in your face and you're just like checked out. And I spoke with one of my uncles, or with my uncle, and he goes, yeah, he said, you ran into the one that makes you forget. He said, he said, what did you do before? I told him what I did. And he goes, yeah, that's what happens. So yeah, that's my personal story that I've run into. That's out in Park Hill, Oklahoma at Merle Home Park. It's a museum out there. The park is shut down now. There was a lot of things that happened with some people passing away out there. I don't want to say the word. And then there were some other things that happened out there. But another story, this happened back in the 90s at that same park. I had an uncle of mine. He had shared this story with me because he had heard my story. And he was a young guy. He was out there with my other uncle and some friends, and they're doing some teenage things, wilding out, just doing their thing. And the cops come. So they're hiding up in those trees. And those trees, you can climb up them because they're all low, but you can get up there real high in that tree. And those cops were trying to find them. And eventually those cops decided to not mess with them, and they went on. There's these trash cans out there that are really heavy. And some of them are bolted to the ground, some of them are not, but they're like hard metal, heavy trash cans. And my uncle said when they got down, something threw, and the trash can might have been 300 pounds, threw it like a pebble at them from over there by that bridge. Threw it at them, and it almost hit them. They were like, man, we got to get out of here. What was that? What just threw that at us? And they took off. And that was something that was shared to me here recently. I had never heard that story, and my uncle heard my story and said, hey, I had the same thing, something similar to me happened to me at that park. And but growing up, I'd always hear these stories of people seeing these things. And as I've gotten older, I think with age, people say, hey, I'm going to tell you this story. And with the podcast, people will tell me their old school stories. And that's one thing I love about doing is hearing these stories. But yeah, that's a few stories that I've shared around a campfire, but I've also had shared to me in that way too.
Yehola, that is incredible that you had that experience. You said, so you're making a noise like an owl, like that type of thing, or
it's like it's one of those, because so the backstory on that is my grandpa did the same thing to some people when he was in college, or he had a cousin that did the same thing, but essentially, and I'm getting goosebumps telling the story, but I'm gonna tell you, when he did that hoot sound, there was laughter in those trees at that park. And it was like maniacal laughter. And that's where I got that idea to do that. I was like, I want to see if something happens. I'm gonna real mess with these people. But one thing about, like I said, when you call these things, when you call these beings and these entities, you're usually the one that has to pay the piper. And that's why I stepped away from the investigation side of that. Because, I used to go out and at one point I was trying to find a cult in a small town here in Oklahoma. I was finding animal bones, animal carcasses, and all this stuff. But that's a story for another time. Maybe we'll talk about that another time. But yeah, man, that's the kind of the backstory behind that hooting.
We'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors. That's incredible. And the cult ones for another time. What was the name of that park again that you had the two incidents were happening at, just for my notes?
Merle Home Park. It was, I think it's owned by the Cherokee Nation actually, but it's basically, the park is named after the house that's at the edge of the road. And that house, I think you can go and visit it, and it's haunted. It's truly haunted. Like I remember being a young guy seeing video camera footage of things moving in the house, like a full chair moving across the floor of the house. I was like, man, that's crazy.
Got it. Merle Home Park in Park Hill. Correct?
Yep, sir. Yep.
Totally got it. Oh, that's very interesting. I feel like might be some listeners that also have some stories from that area. Feel free to contact me, bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Also, I'm pretty sure we'll have Yehola's contact info in the show notes for this as well. We'll ask him later on that. Yehola, I know that you've probably chatted to people from all over the state of Oklahoma. Just curious, have you ever talked to anyone that's had any interesting stories from like LaFleur County or Honubby or anything like that?
I know. So I had somebody tell me, and I don't know exactly where Garfield County is. I had to look. I can't exactly know where that's at. But I had a lady reach out to me about a time when she was a little girl in Garfield County back in the early 70s, I believe. She was a little girl, and she's an older lady now. But she was telling me a story about a time she was walking on the train tracks closer to dark. And she looked behind her, and it was basically a Sasquatch following her on the train tracks. And when she looked back, it was walking behind, like it wasn't close, but you could see it. She could see it, the outline of it was big. And then when she looked, it darted back into the tree line, and then it followed her all the way down to where she was going. Then she got home, and they took off and went home. A story that I had heard, Honubby area, is my grandpa used to do a lot of hunting up in the Kiamichi Mountains. And it wasn't really like an encounter, but it was more of the whole entire area where he was at with his buddy went dead quiet. Could hear a pin drop. Any movement, you could hear something. And he thought that was odd. And he had coon dogs. But I haven't really heard much of LaFleur County. I know that there's some history with the Choctaws out there. I know that there's a famous story about, I think it's the Choctaws. Basically, they went in and had basically a war with these Sasquatch or these Bigfoot. And I think only one person survived to tell the story out of all these guys that went down there to take on this clan. And I know that story's been around for a lot of years.
Fascinating. I can tell. So, Yehola, you are a awesome guest because you have a wealth of knowledge about this state. It's incredible. So I might just start throwing some random things at you and see if anything hits, because I can't have this type of conversation with everyone. Have you ever heard any stories about hyenas being seen in Oklahoma?
It depends on what the description is. I'll tell you. So this is a weird story. And so I used to Uber when I was needing some extra money back when I was a younger guy. This might have been about 5-6 years ago. And I was out, and this is in Bigsby, Oklahoma, where this took place. And I got a ding, and I went down into, once you cross the river, going into Bigsby, when you're going south into Bigsby, if people are in that area or listen, there's a road that takes you next to the river that goes on down. There's a bunch of nice homes out there. And I had picked these two girls up at the end of the road, and I could tell that something was off with them. I was like, they look frazzled, I guess you could say. And me being a conspiracy guy, and I love cryptids, and I'm into the spooky stuff, and I like to hear these things. And so I'm just driving, and I'm not saying anything. I got the music on, and but I'm overhearing these two girls talk about them seeing this weird looking dog. About the same, I wouldn't say about the same size of the car, but it was a little smaller. And she goes, they were like sitting there talking about it. And they were like, man, that dog looked weird. It kind of looked like a hyena. Kind of looked weird. Didn't look like a dog. What do you think that was? And they're sitting there back there talking and describing this thing, sounding. And to me, in my first thought, I thought it was maybe a dog man. And I still think it might be. But the way they described it was like a hyena kind of looking thing. And because it wasn't bigger than the car, but it was like it was bigger than a dog, basically. And they were like, man, I don't know what that was. And they went on to basically, and I didn't ask them about it. I just stayed quiet because I wanted to hear it naturally from them, because they were I could tell that they were upset. Like this thing scared them. And they were sitting there, man, I don't know what that was. It couldn't have been a dog. It couldn't have been this. I don't really know what that was, but it didn't look like anything I've ever seen before. I was waiting, but the guys, there's about 6 or 7 guys that were out there at this, I guess they're having a bonfire out there, out in kind of this, next to this house. I don't really know, but the details on that, but they ended up having to shoo this thing off, whatever this thing was. Now, is it a hyena or was it a dog man? I really don't know. I just recently went and saw a live hyena at this place here. I currently reside in Oklahoma City, but I went to this place and I saw a hyena, full-grown hyena, and the way that this girl described it, and I'm glad that's crazy you asked me this question. As I went and looked at this thing, and this thing, the way she described it, this thing was a little it was way bigger than a dog, but it wasn't like 4 foot tall. It was big. You could tell this animal is a really muscular animal. And I just thought that's an interesting story, that I heard from these two, basically high school girls at a bonfire. It's crazy just overhearing them talk about it.
It's very interesting. And listeners, I'm going to shout out Cryptids of the Corn real quick. If you don't listen to that, you need to. Their podcast is great. And the greatest episode, I think, is when they talk about hyenas and how a lot of dogman sightings are probably misidentified hyenas. It's very interesting. Please take a listen. I'm going to put it in the show notes too. But Yehola, that kind of leads into another question is, are there a lot of dogman sightings in your state as well besides Bigfoot?
Man, from what I've heard, I think they're running everywhere too. I'll tell you a crazy story, and this is a crazy story.
All right.
This is in Oklahoma City. This is in Oklahoma City. This is the biggest city in Oklahoma. I was conversing. I got a story from this woman basically telling me about her childhood here in Oklahoma City. And she went on, the way she described it is the layout of their house. And where their house was in basically a central part in Oklahoma City. There's basically hardly any trees. But she did mention that there's a row of trees that connect on down that just, I guess it's just undeveloped land that goes all the way out till wherever outside Oklahoma City. And I never really got what part of Oklahoma City that she was in, but she, as a little girl one night, and she always felt like she was being watched and when she was playing outside. And she might have been, I think she said she was 8 years old. And she was outside just playing around and just being a little kid. And she always felt like she was being watched. And she told her mom, I'm scared to go outside. She said, what's wrong? There's nothing out here. But their fence is backing up against this thick tree line. There's trees that surrounded it. And one night she's sitting there in her bed, and she just, in the way that she wrote it, it made it sound like she just rolled over, like she was just tossing and turning that night. And she looked over, and there was basically this wolf's head staring at her from into the window. And it was just looking at her. And she looked at it, and I guess the way she described it, it was like she was shook, like she didn't know what she was looking at. And the window was not like a window that was on the ground. This was like a pretty high up window. And she's looking at it, and this creature is looking at her through this window with red eyes. And it's almost like she felt like it wanted her to come outside. And she looked at it and basically screamed when it dawned on her, hey, this is not normal. And when she screamed, her parents come in, and then it was like the end of it. But she had heard tappings on the window sometimes when because she would close the curtains a lot of times, and just happened so that night that she had it open. But that's at Oklahoma City. And for me, that's crazy because it's like a heavily populated area. Another story comes out of, I believe it's out of the Salina area, Salina, Oklahoma. No, I'm sorry, not Salina, Oklahoma. This is out of, I believe it's northern part of, anyways, I'm getting into minutia. But there was a story the elders used to talk about a dog-like creature that would run down this road. And it was known to do this. And basically what it would do is it was passing through it wouldn't be every night, but that would be its route. It would come through, and it was like a dog on its hind legs running fast. An elder one time was talking about the time that her and her brothers had heard something like some type of yipping, and it sounded like baby coyotes. And she was like, what's that sound? And so her brothers decide to go check it out. And so they go through the woods, and they get up to where they hear this kind of chirping, sounds like coyotes. And what they see is an upright werewolf. And it's yipping like a coyote. And they're like, what in the world? So they take off running, and they run back to the house, and they couldn't talk. They couldn't speak for the whole 30 minutes after. And that's on the Cherokee Nation res. One thing about dogman I think is a little bit confused sometimes when in non-native circles, I'd say, is the difference between shapeshifters and skinwalker and a dogman. Those things are not interchangeable. They're different. And there's stories up in, like I said, in Northeast Oklahoma of shapeshifters. A funny story. This is old medicine, but these two women could do these things. They could shapeshift into kind of wolf, like werewolf type thing. And they would always be beefing with each other. They had beef for their entire life. They could never get along, but they would always beef with each other through through this kind of shamanism, shape-shifting thing. And there was a nurse one night that said that she saw a wolf, I guess on its hind legs, walking in the nursing home, walking around in the nursing home. It was that one of those ladies going in to mess with the other lady. There's getting back to Dogman. Something that happened to me when I was on the Illinois, or it was on Halloween night, which is crazy. I'm being very long-winded, and I apologize. And I'm hitting all these different stories and whatnot, but
we'll be back with more Bigfoot Society after these words from our sponsors.
I was on the Illinois River driving to a cabin that we rented out on Halloween night. And I saw something on the right-hand side of the road, and it looked like a wolf. It was on all fours, but it was sitting next on its hind haunches, like if someone was bending down to get out of the way. If you're standing up and then you squat down real quick, it looked like it was already squatting down. And I looked and I said, what was that? This is before I even knew about Dogman. I had no idea about this. And I was like, what was that? And I was like, that's a big dog. I ain't never seen no dog like that. Fast forward into the night, and people are like, man, I don't want to go outside. And I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, man, when we pulled up, there was a big old dog outside. It was like, it wasn't near the house, but it was up the road a little bit where I saw it, but it was on down, like it was coming closer to the cabin where we were at. And they were like, man, we almost hit this big old dog, man. It was huge. We don't even know what it was. We had to swerve out of the way. And that's how they're describing it. And there were some people outside sitting on the porch, and this is a big old doing young people things. And I guess I'm still young, but I'm saying young and dumb stuff. I had some people tell me they swear on everything there was a howl that came from the river. And it was a big howl. We had music going, and they heard it over the music, which is a crazy thing. But that's in Tahlequah. That's up at the river in Tahlequah when it comes to, but I can keep going. There's all just different types of stories. There's one out of kind of southern Oklahoma. When it comes to, I guess it's like a trail. So this thing has been running a trail, and people have seen it. But yeah, man, I think they're pretty rampant here in Oklahoma.
I would say, without a doubt, you guys have some things going on down there with Dogman as well. Not even to mention your hyena story that I just randomly decided to ask you about, which is weird that came up. But I have a question. It's pardon my ignorance, but so I know that on the Navajo Nation, they have the Navajo Rangers. Mm-hmm. Is there an equivalent of that on the reservations in your area?
So, no, I would say no. Now, granted, when you're dealing, each nation here in the Northeast, in the 5 civilized tribes, and it's Seminole, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Muskogee Creek. And everything has to be more corporate nowadays, I would say, when it comes to that. But I would not be surprised, and this is just my thought, is I would not be surprised if they had a unit or some type of paranormal investigative section of each Cherokee Marshals, and then the Creek Nation Light Horse. I would be surprised if they went out and investigated, because one thing that's happening especially in Creek country is a lot of people are moving out of the city and they're buying land. And I wouldn't be surprised that those, especially Creek Nation or Cherokee Nation, they have people that go out and say, hey, we got a weird call of this 7-foot tall hairy man. And it may be off the record. I don't know, but I would not be surprised at all if they had something like that.
I wouldn't be surprised either. And if there's someone that's listening and that's you, and hey, if you want to reach out, that's cool. But Yehola, man, this has been such a fun and refreshing interview. My goodness, this has been a good time. Do you mind spending a few minutes talking about what the War Cry podcast is, what listeners can expect to hear when they subscribe and listen to that?
Yeah. So a lot of the things that you guys hear, I do discuss some of these things. On my podcast, I go a little bit harder when it comes to certain things. My podcast consists of basically true crime to conspiracy to native stories to basically anything and everything that goes bump in the night. And I try to do research on things, and I try to reach out to people and get information. But the podcast is available on basically Spotify, Apple, Google. It's on YouTube. I got some interviews on there. Every episode, I think up until the latest one, is up on YouTube. But you can find me, like I said, Warcry Podcast, and you can even add me on Facebook too as well, Yahola Tiger. But send me a message. Sometimes people just add me, and I'm like, I ain't going to accept it because I don't know who you are. But if you send me a message and say, hey, man, I heard you on Bigfoot Society, or I heard you here, or I love the podcast, and I'll accept you. Because like I said, I like talking to people, and I like getting information and stories from people.
Absolutely. And listeners, if Yehola said something and it jogged your memory about something about Oklahoma, reach out to him, send him a message, get him more information for sure. But Yehola, it has been a pleasure chatting with you tonight.
Real quick, you didn't ask me about that. So have you heard about the
son of a gun? Yeah, I totally didn't. Yeah, go for it, man.
So you didn't ask me about the casino that reportedly had that the video of that Bigfoot coming out of the grease trap. Have you heard about that?
I've heard of it. Yeah.
So I've had an individual come forward, and he worked security there.
Okay.
And he himself, before that video happened, now there's multiple theories. There's multiple different things that people say that happened, but he swears by this is what happened. Is essentially that, and this is, I'm gonna say whatever. We're here. I've already mentioned it, so we're here. Essentially, what happened was the tribes confiscated it. The tribe confiscated that video.
Okay,
but they were late, and allegedly, there are copies possibly out there somewhere.
Oh my goodness!
And I would not be surprised if we hear 20 years from now that it came up, that the video resurfaced somehow. I've also heard a theory from someone different that said that Matt Moneymaker from the BFRO bought it.
Oh, jeez, you're going to get me in so much trouble. There's a big allegedly. That's wild. Okay.
That's from somebody that works there that said that as well. Now, like I said, one thing about this tape, and this is why everything I'm talking about is allegedly, and nothing is for certain. But what I do know for sure is that from what I was told from this person, that there was a group of older ladies, and this is how this whole thing culminated into what it became, is either this happened before or after, and I cannot exactly remember how they described it, but there was a group of senior citizens that had come to gamble, which is a wild thing to do, is to send nursing home people in the casino to spend their nursing home money. So
yeah, that's messed up. Yeah,
that is wild. But it was a bunch of senior citizens that I guess, I don't know if it was a nursing home, but whatever. The bus driver saw this thing standing at the tree line, waiting for those ladies to come out, or those ladies and those men to come out, those senior citizens to come out. He took off and quit. Then the guy that like I said, the person I've talked to basically saw one of these things and heard tree knocks and hollers, I think the next night. And then that's when they got the film. And wow. This is something that I've been very interested in, and I've been trying to get people to come forward. And I've even put it out there on some episodes. Hey, have you heard anything? Let me know. And like I said, I had this gentleman who worked there, and he was relaying to me that don't never say never on that thing, because it may eventually come out. And when it does, it'll blow the roof off. Because this tape was, and if you remember, this is like early 2000s, I believe, maybe even before that, maybe. I remember seeing it on the news very briefly, and I remember they mentioned it here in Oklahoma, and that has been a thing that I have been trying to get to the bottom of, and I've been asking people basically since I heard about it. And like I said, they said I heard that one of the managers went to the news station, and that's how it got out. And then they had to quickly reel it in and things like that. So if anybody has heard anything about this videotape and about this casino, I'm not going to mention the casino because I don't want anyone to get in trouble for defamation or anything like that. But everything, like I said, everything from the point that I mentioned the casino to right now, it's all alleged. But if you know anything or you've heard anything or somebody that knows somebody, let me know because, like I said, I've been trying to get to the bottom of this, and this is a mystery that I would like to crack.
Dude, I'm loving it. I love when people dig deep into their state mysteries about Bigfoot. I think that was back in 2002 or something around
Yes.
there. This alleged incident with the casino and the missing footage. And it's just a fascinating story. And listeners, if you reach out to Yehola, please.
I didn't even mention what was on the tape either. I'm sorry. So there was two different things that I was told from, like I said, multiple people, is that they got a full shot of this thing. A full shot, like a clear cut. This is Bigfoot. Then I also heard that all they could see, from someone else said that all they could see was an arm, and this thing was eating the grease out of this trap, and it was eating whatever was in that bin.
That's what I've heard. Yeah.
And the one that I believe is I think they've seen the whole thing. That's the story that I believe. Is that they found the full video. The person that I talked to said he's seen it, and he said they will never be able to there's no footage out there that's going to be able to prove the existence of this thing, but that video is what he told me.
He's seen, holy mackerel. Have you recorded an interview with this guy?
So it's all he may eventually do it.
Okay.
He's an older gentleman. He's aged a lot, I'll say.
Yeah.
He currently lives in a different country. And so he told me, he said, I'm going to build up the nerve. And he said he may talk about it, but he has a lot of other stories about Canada, Dogman, and he's got all types of other stories that he shared with me. But yeah, you never know, guys. You never know.
Those are the guys you need, man. That's an interview right there, man. Hopefully you can get a great relationship with that gentleman and be able to interview him. But man, I love talking to individuals like that as well, man. It'd be exciting to see if something happens from this in the future, and maybe that video will one day show up again. Be incredible.
Yeah, it would be.
Oh, I love a good mystery. And that's a good mystery, dude. Thank you for bringing that up at the end. Yehola, this has been a good time, man. Did you have any other closing thoughts before we start to end out this episode?
Yeah, I just appreciate you having me on. And like I said, a lot of everything that I've talked about, or to me, it's all very interesting to me, and it's very intriguing. And like I said, I appreciate you having me on, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. If you've had any encounters in Oregon, which I'm sure there's probably a few of you out there, please feel free to reach out immediately. You can use email bigfootsociety@gmail.com. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. If you want to join in the fun, you can join over at patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. I'll see you there. And again, thanks for listening.
her and I can get on here and we can tell our stories. Maybe there's somebody else out there listening that's too afraid to tell their story. Maybe this will give them the courage to come out and not feel so bad about it. Who cares what anybody thinks? I know what I saw. I know what's out there. That's all I care about.
Please let people know. Please let them know. If you ever see one of these things, you need to tell. Because if you don't, then shame on you. You know? Shame on you.